Yes, Ms Graham.
Thank you. I'd like to go on to your inquiry statement, and there's 3 paragraphs I'm interested in asking you about. So we'll start with paragraph 6 first of all. And you'll see that this covers part of the screen. And the one I'm particularly interested in, I'm going to be asking you questions about what you saw. You've told us before lunch how you arrived in the car. I saw PC Craig Walker struggling with a male, who I now know to be Mr Bio, on the ground. He didn't have control of him, so that is a risk to the officer and to Mr Bio. It stood out to me that PC Walker, who is a well-built officer, was struggling to control Mr Bio. When Mr Bio was on the ground, he was kicking out with his legs, and he was actively resisting my colleagues, who were trying to restrain him. And then another 2 paragraphs, 10 and 11, please. And you'll see on the other page, paragraph 10, I got out the car and assessed the situation. I saw the signs of a struggle, as already described. I then saw my colleagues struggling with Mr Bio. Then I went over to where Mr Bio was in order to assist. And then at number 11, with the passage of time, I'm not entirely sure who was present when I first arrived. What I said to the Perk was that I saw PC Walker struggling with Mr Bio. That stuck out to me then, and it continues to stick out to me. I also told Perk that PC Ashley Tomlinson was beside Mr Bio, but I was not sure if he was standing or on the ground, or if he had a hold of Mr Bio at that point. That was my best recollection at the time. I saw Mr Bio on the ground and he was kicking his legs. He was not face down at that point. So there's 3 paragraphs there that you've told us about what you saw when you initially attended and got out the car. But I'd like to know, first of all, what was the first thing that you saw when you got out the diary car?
So the first thing I saw was there was officers with someone. I don't know who the officers were at the time, but there's officers, they're with someone, I don't know yet. I get out the car, I recall there was a baton on the roadway, there was either Pava or a CS, I don't know which. It was on the roadway, and then I make my way over to the officers.
Right. So can we maybe look at image 4 that we had on the screen just before lunch? And while Ms Smith gets that on the screen, did you have an impression when you first arrived how many officers were involved?
As in what I've seen before I get out the car?
Yeah, you said there were officers that you saw.
Yes.
Did you have an impression of how many?
I thought there was 2.
2. But you said you didn't know who they were at that stage?
No, not at that stage.
And you've said that you saw a baton on the roadway.
Yes.
Where was that? Would you like to point it out on the...
Yeah, sure. So,
I think on the circle with 1 is where you were getting out the driver's side. If you want, we'll remove that.
No,
and
it's fine. Right, okay. So for the baton, but on the roadway.
On the roadway. Yeah. And then you also mentioned a spray, a CS or a Pava spray.
That was... I can't be certain what was before, if it was a baton or the spray, but they were roughly in the same kind of general kind of area.
Right. Yeah. And was that prior to where you saw your colleagues?
Yes.
You saw that before you were near your colleagues?
Yes.
Right. Thank you. And you've told us in your statement that you then decided to become involved or to assist. So tell us, as you decided to assist, what was your first thing that you did?
So for what I recall, the first thing I did was assist by restraining Mr Bayou at his legs.
Tell us how you did that.
So what I did was, at the time, I recall that I didn't see anyone on his legs. So there's a recognised OST technique where officers can restrain the legs. They do that by dropping down onto, in this case, Mr. Bayou's legs. You don't go down on your elbow, but it's on the flat side, depending if you're right-handed, left-handed, etc. of your body. I'm right-handed.
You're
sorry.
right-handed.
Yes. So I drop down on the right side of my body. The elbow would effectively go on the ground, but your kind of weight here lands on the kind of thigh area before you would then make contact with the ground. Okay, it's a recognised technique. Then what you would do is you would almost, the best way I could describe it is either like a kind of barrel roll or sausage roll, kind of down the legs, so that you've done a full kind of turn down, and then you'd then be facing the feet, at which point you can cross over the legs to get a hold of the feet, so that if fast straps need to be applied, they can be by another officer.
Right. I'll just go over that a little bit
Yeah,
more
sure.
slowly, if that's okay. So you've talked about going down onto the ground area,
Yes.
where Mr. Bayou was,
Yes.
in the area of his legs. What was the first point at which your body had contact with Mr. Bayou's body?
What part of my body was the first contact?
Well, I think you pointed
Yes.
to your right-hand side.
Yeah, sure. So it would be like my right-hand side.
And where did that contact with Mr. Bayou?
So that would have been contact on kind of upper legs.
Above his knee?
Yeah, or in that general area.
Right.
Yes, but it would
And-
have been kind of thighs, back of thighs, front of thighs, whatever, or near the knees, and then roll down. Or instead of rolling down, sometimes you're not able to, you might just kind of shuffle down.
Right.
So, yeah.
And what did you do on that day, on the 3rd of May? Was it a roll or was it a shuffle?
I can't recall if it was a roll or a shuffle, but those are the two things that could only have been done.
It would have been one or the
Yes,
other.
yes.
Would you mind giving the chair a demonstration of both of those manoeuvres?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So if you come out here,
sure.
you'll see there's a bit of sticky tape on the floor. And you may have heard me say to other witnesses that the audio isn't picking up much there.
Yeah.
But I'll ask you to go down on the ground and demonstrate the first manoeuvre where you're going to your right side.
Yeah, sure.
And then I'll ask you to demonstrate the roll, and then I'll ask you to demonstrate the shuffle. Okay, thank you. So first of all, show how you went down onto his legs,
Okay,
please.
so if we just take it that Mr. Bayou's head would have been up this side and the legs are down here then, okay?
Right.
Obviously I can't do it in real time. 'Cause
No,
that's
no.
obviously- But so you'd be down, right? So remember, you've kind of done this in a force. So you went down on to the legs, down like that, okay? So your elbows now side on.
I see that. So you've gone down onto your knees, you've then effectively gone down onto your right hip, and then you put your right elbow on the ground.
What I would say about that though, there isn't time, I've just done this in this demonstration, there isn't time to go down the legs, you actually drop.
It's very quick.
Yes.
In real
so
life.
You wouldn't drop on your knees, you would drop on the subject. So, onto the legs
Right.
with
So it's
the side of your body.
a quicker movement in real life.
Yes.
Not in the stages that you have
No,
just
no.
demonstrated. Right, so thank you. And then can you show us the role that you've been describing,
sure.
if possible?
Yeah, of course. So, on the legs, so it's literally, and then you're down at the ankles, you cross them over. This time your weight is transferred lower down the legs. They're not at the thighs, they're not at the knee, they're both behind you now. You cross over both legs, and then I could try and show you after this, so that someone can put on fast straps if they're required.
Right, so you've rolled down the body, and you talked like as a sausage roll.
Yeah,
So you're
barrel,
closer to
yeah.
the ankles or the feet,
Yes.
but the legs still remain between your right arm and your right hand side of your body, and you're using both hands to secure the ankles or the feet.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And then could you demonstrate the shuffle movement,
So that's
please?
obviously just, so again, at the same point, the upper legs or knee, and
Mm-hmm.
instead of doing the roll, just shuffle the weight down to you, and you would do the same thing, the ankles, and you've still got the weight, but I
So
suppose at
you're-
one point your weight probably comes off a bit
Yeah.
on the slide down.
So your feet remain on the ground.
Yes.
Your knees and hips are shuffling along, and
Yes.
your ankle is shuffling but remaining as a point to contact with the ground.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please come back to your microphone. Thank you. Can you tell us where the other officers were when you were on the ground on the legs of Mr. Bio, PC Gibson?
I recall Craig Walker being there. He was at the top half of Mr. Bio. He looked like he was kind of reaching over almost to grab his arm or arms. I don't know if I've seen one of the arms, but so PC Walker's effectively over Mr. Bio, looking like he's trying to grab an arm.
Was he on the other side from where you were?
Yeah, so so when I come down, so yeah, we are on opposite sides.
So you've shown us your car,
Yeah.
and you approached the events that were going on from that angle, from Henry Road towards Hayfield Road.
Yeah.
And PC Walker, was he on the other side of Mr. Bio from you?
So even if we took this, for example, this isn't where it is, it's not far from, but if we're talking about me and PC Walker could be number 2, I would be number 1. So we're on opposite sides.
Right. And you said that when you pointed on the floor and did your demonstration, you said his head would be up here.
Yeah.
Would that be towards the hedge area that we see on Hayfield Road?
Yeah, that's right. So Mr. Bio's head would have been pointing in the direction of the hedgerow, and the feet would have been pointing in the road.
And we've heard that there's a grassy area with trees on the other side of Hayfield Road.
Yeah.
So his legs would have been pointing
Yeah.
more towards
Yeah.
it. And where was PC Tomlinson?
I recall PC Tomlinson. I think PC Tomlinson is almost at like the bum of the mail.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's what I seem to remember.
Where was he in relation to PC Walker?
So he was at the same side that I was at. So he's on the opposite side of PC Walker.
And was he to your left or to your right?
No, he would have been to my right.
So he's on the same side as you,
Yep.
but to your right.
Yep.
And you think he was more in the bum area of
Yeah.
Mr. Bio?
Yeah.
What position was he in?
He was crouched. I don't know what he was doing, but he seemed to be crouched.
Okay.
He was almost like hunched over.
Could you give us a demonstration of that?
Yeah,
Would you-
sure. For what I recall, anyway. Yeah.
Right. Come back out, please, and show us how PC Tomlinson was. And then while you're there, I'll ask you to demonstrate what PC Walker was doing as
Sure.
well. So for Tomlinson first, please.
Right. Okay. So this is the right side.
Right.
Mr.
So
Bio.
head
Yep.
to my left, your right,
Yep.
and legs to my
Yes.
right, your left.
So this is PC Tomlinson. This is what I recall seeing. I think he was doing something like this. That's what I recall seeing. I couldn't see how arched. I seen that he was on his knees,
Right.
but I don't.
So leaning on his knees and leaning over.
Yeah, it looked like that.
Was his body making contact with Mr. Bio's
I
body?
couldn't see for there because.
All right. And then can I ask you to do a demonstration of what PC Walker was doing? And you've told us he was on the other side.
So I don't know what he was doing with his legs. If he was on his knees or if they were flat out, but he is over the male. Some of his body looks like it's on him, and he's trying to. It looks like he's trying to grab something, which I'm assuming is his arm.
Thank you. I'll ask you to come back to the mic. So you've shown that that last demonstration was of PC Walker, and you say he was leaning over the male, that's Mr. Bio, and leaning over towards, you thought perhaps his arm?
Yes.
Mr. Bio's arm?
Yes.
Thank you. Can I ask you to look at your Perk Statement? So this is the one that you gave on the 4th of June 2015. And if we can turn to page 4, please. Sorry. Page 4, and I'll look at paragraphs 6, 7, 8, 9. They're just short paragraphs. I'll read these out when they're on the screen. They're towards the bottom of page 4. And paragraph 6, I saw there were officers. So if you could just go up. There we are. I saw there were officers on the ground with a male. I got out my vehicle and made my way to the officers and the male. As I approached, I got a clearer view. I then saw a black male lying on the ground. He was on his side, left-hand side facing me, not sure of clothing worn by the male. There were 2 officers with the male that I noticed, and that was PC Ashley Tomlinson and PC Craig Walker. And that's what you've told us. You say there, when you spoke to Perk, he was on his side, his left-hand side facing me. And is that, looking at that now, do you remember that was the position he was in?
Yes.
Thank you. And then you say, I didn't notice any other officers at that time. There could have been other officers, but I didn't notice them. PC Ashley Tomlinson was at the legs of the male. I'm not sure if PC Tomlinson was standing or on the ground. The male's legs were to the roadway, his head towards the houses. His whole body was on the pavement. I cannot recall if PC Tomlinson had a hold of the male at that point. Now, looking at that now, do you remember saying that to Perk?
That's what we'd have said.
That's what you said. All right. And then PC Walker was struggling with the male. He was at the rear of the male who was on his left side, leaning over him and trying to grab the male's arms. The male was struggling. He was kicking his legs about, swaying back and forward with his arms and shoulders. I do not know if the male was handcuffed at that point. I do not know if PC Walker managed to get a hold of his arms or not. When you say he was swaying back and forward with his arms and shoulders, do you remember what you meant by that?
Yeah, so almost like a kind of get off, struggling.
Okay. So it's a struggle?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then can I ask you to look at your inquiry statement again? And I'd like to look at paragraphs 16, 17 and 22. So if we start with 16, and you were asked by the inquiry team to provide as much detail as you could about the restraint and what your involvement had been. And you say here, 16, I was involved in the restraint of Mr. Bio. Mr. Bio was on the ground. I dropped down onto Mr. Bio's thighs with the side of my upper body. I was leaning on the right side of my body facing his feet. This is a recognised OST technique. I was doing this to gain control of his legs to prevent him kicking out. I think that's what you've told us and demonstrated today.
Yes.
I do not know whether I rolled or slid down, but I ended up further down his legs, closer to his feet. And again, that's what you've said today. And then at some point, other officers put fast straps on Mr. Bio while I was restraining his legs. And I think, do you know who the other officers were?
I don't know if I mentioned it. I seem to think, I can kind of recall that it might have been Alan Smith and PC McDonough.
Right. James McDonough.
Yes. I remember PC McDonough at one point when I was down on Mr. Bio's legs, PC McDonough was down near the feet. So.
And he's the officer you went with,
yes,
isn't he? So we've not heard from PC McDonough yet, but we may do. So then 17, you were asked to describe his position, and was he prone? And you say, I cannot clearly recollect now how Mr. Bio was positioned when I was restraining his legs. Do you have any sense of the position of his legs when you were restraining them?
I don't know. That technique can be done when he's on his side as well as if he was, when I say on his front, I appreciate I'm talking about his legs, kind of as he's almost face down, so it can be done both ways. I recall that it might have been on his front, so it would have been the back of his legs.
So you were lying on the back of his legs?
Yeah.
And were his knees facing the ground?
Yeah, they would have been.
Yeah, thank you. And then can we look at paragraph 22, please? And you're asked about what weight, if any, did you place on Mr. Bio and what force there was. And your answer, I applied my upper body weight to lie on Mr. Bio's upper legs, then his lower legs. And is that really what you've demonstrated to us today?
Yes.
And then once the fast straps were applied, I felt able to take my weight off him slightly. And to what extent do you mean I felt able to take my weight off him slightly?
Well, just to let us understand, so obviously I'm putting the greater weight on because the male's resisting, he's still kicking out. Even whilst I have my upper body weight on, he's still able to kick out. And the way I would describe it is almost like being on a seesaw. Like, you're still going up. At the time, I weighed 12 stone, and I felt he's still trying to kick off. Mm-hmm. Obviously, later, when fast straps are applied, he's not going to be able to kick off as much. There's a restraint there to prevent him from kicking out as actively. Therefore, I don't need to apply as much weight to keep the restraint.
So if he's not struggling as much,
yes,
you can apply less weight,
yes,
or less force to
yes,
his legs.
Yes.
And that's what you did.
The way I've always looked at it, the kind of force matches the resistance.
Right.
So when he's not resisting as much, I don't need to put on as much weight.
Right. So the more resistance, the greater the weight or the force
Yeah, because,
applied.
you know, putting on that force, if I don't apply my full force at that point, he could potentially get free his legs, he might get up.
Yeah. He's struggling to get up, but you're struggling to restrain him.
Yes.
So you want to match that level of force?
Yes.
Thank you. And then you were asked how long was the weight or force applied, and you say, I applied a greater amount of weight before the fast straps were applied. After that, I applied a lesser degree of weight before coming off Mr. Bio when I heard PC Alan Smith saying to get off Mr. Bio.
Yeah.
Is that right? And you can't see how long you applied the weight in minutes or seconds. Do you have any impression of how long you were applying that weight?
No, none at all.
Okay, thank you. Trying to look at the duration of this. When you arrived, he's already on the ground. And we saw from the footage that was at 7:21:46. And you've talked about applying your body weight to lie on his upper legs, then his lower legs, and then until the fast straps were applied. Do you have any sense now of how long it took from your arrival to you effectively alleviate or lifting some of the weight or the force when the fast straps were applied?
I don't know. It seemed so quick for the whole incident, so I wouldn't be able to say how long the weight's been applied before less weight. Well, how the greater weight's been applied before less weight can be applied.
Okay.
But it was however long it took for the fast straps to actually get put on, and I'm sorry, I don't know how long that took.
No need to apologise. Can we look at paragraph 23? I think you were asked about the weight applied by other officers to Mr. Bio. And you say, at that point I was involved in the restraint of Mr. Bio. I was facing towards his feet, so I couldn't see what weight, if any, was being applied by officers behind me.
Yeah.
Was it your impression, Constable, that they were applying any different weight or pressure to that you were applying if Mr. Bio was struggling?
I wouldn't be able to say, and the reason I say that is because I'm concentrating on his legs, and that, as I say, is you have to understand OST technique, but when you do that, you are facing the feet. You've applied your roll or your slide down, you're at the feet, okay? If I then was to pay attention to what's going behind me whilst having the feet, then I'm not concentrating on that.
Right.
Again, going back, he could kick his legs out, and then we've got more of a problem.
So would it be fair to say you're working as a team, and you're concentrating on your element of
Yes,
that.
yes, that's fair to say, yes.
And then can we look at paragraph 6, please? And you've said here that we looked at this earlier, and you said, I saw PC Craig Walker struggling with a male. He didn't have control of him. So, and you then go on to say Mr. Bye was on the ground kicking out with his legs and actively resisting my colleagues who were trying to restrain him. So is it fair to say that at that time, PC Walker, who was struggling to control Mr. Bio was resisting, that he would have been applying some force or some weight to try to get control of Mr. Bio?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. That obviously, you know, again, I've not seen the full extent because I'm at the feet, but you would imagine that PC Walker is applying some form of weight to match a kind of restraint for Mr. Bio. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to show you some enhanced Snapchat footage now. We've been showing this to other people to try and identify who's who, and I'm hoping you'll be able to help me with that as well. So it's at 7:22:10, I think, but it's Snapchat footage. We'll this is from the combined audio and visual footage. And you'll see there, so this is at 7:22, it stopped at 12 seconds. And do you see the officers? We've heard that this, it's gone. No problem at all. There we are. We've heard that this is Snapchat footage taken from one of the nearby houses. And you'll see that this is officers on Hayfield Road. Do you recognise the car behind those officers? Is that the diary car?
Yes, that was.
That's the car you got out. Yes. And do you see that there's a number of officers there in that Snapchat footage? Now we can play this, it only lasts a few seconds, and then I'm going to ask you if you can see yourself.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. That's fine, thank you. If we can go back to it. Would you like to see that again? Because it's quite, are you fine? Right, if we can go back to that, please. And then I'd like you to see if you can point to yourself. Let's just wait till it's on the screen. There. Can you see yourself? Do you want it moved on a little?
No, that's fine. I'm on the standing far right.
You're standing, facing the person with the camera?
No, I'm back against the camera on the right-hand side.
Oh, so we've heard other people saying that that is indeed you, PC Gibson.
Yeah.
You recognise yourself.
Yep.
So that's you standing on the far right-hand side, moving towards the legs.
Yeah.
And let's just watch that for a moment or two. Do you, stop it there, please. Do you see who the other officers are? Can you recognise them?
Maybe not for that clip, but yes, I can recognise them.
Right. Well, do you want to tell us who they were?
Yeah, sure. So,
far left, do you know who the person at the head was?
your far left is PC Alan Smith.
And with his back to us, down on the, crouching down or kneeling down?
Yeah, so next to Alan Smith is PC Payton. You can tell that for the vest he's got on.
What is it about PC Payton's vest?
I don't know if he had some kind of back problem or something and had to wear a different vest, but he always wore that vest, and it's different to everyone else's vest because all the rest of us was the same. So.
Okay. And then opposite PC Payton, there's someone standing there facing the camera. Who's that?
That's PC McDonough.
McDonough.
Yeah.
And then crouched down on the other side of the person or people on the ground facing the camera. Do you know who that was?
Yeah, it must be Ashley Tomlinson.
Tomlinson. And that's you on the right. And then I'm going to ask you if you can see what you're doing at this point. So let's just play this clip, please. We've got a slower version if that helps. Do you see that?
Yep.
Do you know what you were doing there?
Yeah, so obviously what I've said to start with for my best recollection is I went on the legs. Obviously by looking at that I can see what's happened there. Now, with his leg, it looks like I've tried to bend his leg to his knee.
Yes.
Now, I think it just looks like one leg, to be fair.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have managed to get two. But I've tried to bend one of the legs up towards into like his knee, top of his thigh, so the heel would press against his thigh.
Right.
If that makes sense.
So his knee would be face down on the ground at that point.
Yeah.
And you've lifted the leg
Yeah.
up.
What I'm trying to do there is cross. There's another technique where you can cross the legs like that. Your kind of stomach area and a bit lower can press and lock the legs in, and that will give you free hands to try and help and restrain, whether to help with putting cuffs on, that kind of thing.
So that's Mr. Bio's leg.
Yes.
And you're trying to do a technique where you cross his legs.
Yes.
And which leg of Mr. Bio's was it that you...
I think that'd be the right leg.
His right leg.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And can I then ask you to look at paragraph 24, please, of your inquiry statement? You were asked about the application of handcuffs to Mr. Bio and what position he was in. And you say, the first time I remember seeing that Mr. Bio was handcuffed was after I got off his legs. My memory of the position is now not clear, but what I said to the Perk was that he was cuffed to the front, and that was my best recollection at the time. And you say the first time I remember he was handcuffed was after I got off his legs. So when we saw the footage a moment ago and you had stood up and walked round to the legs, was that when you noticed he'd been handcuffed?
No, that would have been when I got off his legs after I'd done the manoeuvre, the roll of the slider.
Right. Was that later?
Yeah, yeah.
That was later. So after we saw the footage, you then went down onto his legs?
Yeah.
Right. So we see the footage, that's you standing, bending the knee, and then after that you're on his legs, doing the moves you've demonstrated.
Yes.
And it was after you completed that and stood up that you saw the handcuffs.
Yes.
Thank you. And do you have any impression of how long that process took?
No, they seem to go really quick.
All right, thank you. Do you know who applied the handcuffs?
Nope.
No. So, do you know whether the handcuffs were on first or the leg restraints?
No.
After the leg restraints were applied, were you aware of whether his legs were moving?
When the leg restraints were applied?
When they were
Yes.
applied.
Yes.
Do you remember where they were applied, the leg restraints?
Well, I remember one being at the ankle. I wasn't sure what was going on behind me.
All right.
But where I ended up on his legs, lower down, the other fast strap, if there was another fast strap, would have been behind me.
Right.
Applied,
So we
if that
may
makes
have
sense.
heard that there was fast straps at his ankles and then above his knee.
Okay then, yeah, so I would be aware of the ankles, but for behind me I wouldn't know, but if they were obviously applied then yeah, it would be behind me.
So anything going on above the knee would have been behind your back?
Yes.
Thank you. Can I ask you about when Mr. Bio stopped struggling? Can I ask you to look at your Perk Statement, page 6, please, paragraph 3. And you see, the next thing I heard, do you see that on the screen?
Yeah, yes.
The next thing I heard was someone saying, "Get off him." I think it was PC Alan Smith. I got off the male's legs and got to my feet. The male was not struggling or anything then. I got up and stood at the male's feet facing him. The male was on his front. The left-hand side of his face was on the pavement, facing down to Henry Road. So is this the point you got off the male's legs? Was this after the ankle straps the fast straps had been applied to the ankle?
Yes.
And it says the male was not struggling or anything then. So
That's
at that stage, when you got up, he wasn't struggling.
Correct.
And at that point, he was on his front. The left-hand side of his face, that's Mr. Bio's face, was on the pavement,
Yes.
facing in the direction of Henry Road to the roundabout.
Gallagher's pub, yeah.
Gallagher's pub, thank you. Can we then look at your inquiry statement, paragraph 26 and 35, please? And paragraph 26, you were asked, how did Mr. Bio react to the restraint? Before I got involved, Mr. Bio was actively struggling and kicking out his legs. Even after I was restraining his legs, he was still attempting to kick. I could feel that his legs were still moving. After the fast straps were applied, his legs were still moving, but that movement was reduced. And then can we look at paragraph 35? Please provide as much detail as you can about when you became aware that he'd lost consciousness. And you say, I was not aware of Mr. Bio losing consciousness. And I'd like to ask you about this sort of moment. We've heard some evidence from PC Smith that he noticed that Mr. Bio had become unconscious. And were you aware that PC Smith had become aware Mr. Bio was unconscious?
No, the only thing I was aware of is that I'm sure it was PC Smith had told me to get off him, or whoever else was on him to get off him.
And you immediately got off him when
Yeah.
you were told?
Yeah.
And once you'd got off him, where were you positioned, or what did you do?
I think I stayed down towards the feet, but I wasn't on Mr. Bio.
Were you standing in that area of the feet at that
I don't
time?
know if standing or crouching.
Okay. How long after you stood or you were crouching, how long was it before you realised he was unconscious then?
Oh, no, I don't think it was long. I think I started realising a problem when I think somebody was going to get a mouth bag to look like they were going to start CPR.
We've heard some evidence about a valve and
Yeah,
a
I've
face
probably not
mask.
described that well, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's the same thing, yeah.
When you were standing or crouching at his feet area, what were the other officers doing at that point?
I don't know. I don't know about all of them. I'm sure PC Smith is quite involved trying to check the officers and Mr. Bio's breathing, and I'm sure Alan Payton was also assisting with that.
Okay. Do you remember what PC Walker was doing?
Not at that point, no.
Miss PC Tomlinson?
No.
Can I ask you to look at your Perk Statement 258, page 6, paragraph 5, please? And you'll see it says, at that point, I seen PC Craig Walker, PC Alan Payton, that's the first I'd seen him, and PC Alan Smith. PC Walker was crouched to the left-hand side of the male, facing towards him at his upper body. He was not holding the male or having any physical interaction with him. That's the first time I saw the male was handcuffed. He was handcuffed to the front. I know that as PC Alan Smith checked the man's breathing, I think he did that as he is an OST instructor. There was no indication that anything was wrong that I'm aware of. PC Smith confirmed that the male was breathing verbally. I think he said something like, he's breathing. When he'd done this, he moved him to his side. That's when I saw the handcuffs to the front of the male. Looking at that now, do you remember this moment where he's moved onto his side, that Mr. Bio was moved onto his side?
Yes.
And do you remember which side he was moved onto?
Left-hand side.
His left-hand side. And is that the point that you realised he had handcuffs on?
Yes.
Right, thank you. And then we've heard that at that moment PC Smith recognises he's unconscious, but he's breathing. But then around 4.5 minutes later, he realised he'd stopped breathing. I'm interested in knowing what was happening after PC Smith realised he was unconscious but breathing, which is the point you mention in this statement here. So what happened in the period immediately after PC Smith recognised he was unconscious but breathing?
I'm not sure. I'm sure like CPR started pretty soon after an ambulance was called. I was quite shocked at that point.
What were you doing in this period?
No, as I said, I was crouched beside his feet. So no, I wasn't doing much at that time.
You weren't really involved in
No.
the events at that time?
The way I looked at that point is that I was officer 3 years experience, and one was an OST instructor with 10 years. The other two were more senior than him. I don't know in any circumstance where an officer of 3 years tells 3 officers with more service what to do.
So we've heard that PC Smith was an OST trainer. When you refer to the other more experienced officers, who are you talking about?
So PC Payton, I'm not one to speculate and say who had more service out of PC Payton and PC Walker, but I think both of them had more service than PC Alan Smith.
Right. So we've heard they were the most experienced.
And
members of the
I
team.
don't know who had more, but yeah.
So you wouldn't have felt that was your place to contribute to that?
Definitely not.
All right, thank you. And then, do you remember, I think you said in paragraph 38 of your statement to the inquiry that you were aware that PC Smith and PC Walker performed CPR on Mr. Bio at that time, and you're not sure if PC Payton also assisted?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. And can I ask you to look at Perk 258 again, please, page 6, and it's the final paragraph I'm interested in looking at this time. Thank you. And you say, I'm sure that PC Walker asked for an ambulance, and the next thing the male was turned onto his back. I don't know who'd done that, and then CPR started, chest compressions. It was still PC Walker, PC Smith and PC Payton who were round the male. It was a bit frantic at this time. The first person I remember doing CPR was PC Craig Walker. PC Smith and PC Payton were at some stage doing CPR, but I'm not sure exactly at what point. And do you remember saying that to Perk? When you say it was a bit frantic by this time, what do you mean?
People try to do CPR, panicking, other officers not sure what's happening. That's what I mean by frantic.
How were you feeling at this point?
Horrific.
When you say horrific, what do you mean?
Shocked. What's going on?
Yeah.
I've never experienced anything like this before.
All right. And then I'm going to move away from this. I'm going to ask you to look at another couple of photos for me, please.
Sure.
So Perk 03374. And again, if you can help us identify people, that'd be very helpful. I've been asking the other officers to do the same. So you'll see this photograph here, taken at a later stage, and there's various people identified. Someone's written photographs, and we may hear from this officer later. But you'll see that you're identified there, PC Gibson. Do you recognise yourself in that photo?
Yeah.
Yeah. And is that correct, that you've been identified correctly?
And what I said earlier as well is that I couldn't recall if once the restraint had all finished, if I was standing or crouching at the feet, but that would tie in because that is me at the bottom of the feet.
That's you crouching at the feet of Mr. Bio.
Yes.
And looking at the other officers that are named, do you agree with the identification of the other officers? We see start from the left, P.S. Maxwell, it's Sergeant Maxwell.
So everyone else is fine.
Yes. It sounds like there's a but coming.
DC Connell, yeah, that's him. And if D.I. Robson's there, then that's maybe him, but I don't know who that is with the black.
Yeah. So you can't tell from D.I. Robson
No.
because the photo is blurred at
No.
that part. But everyone else?
But the rest of the people labelled, that's PCP, is all correct, yeah.
Thank you. And then can we look at the next photograph, please? And again, it's just a different photograph. Again, looking at that, you'll see that you've been identified there as at the feet. Sort of, it looks like you're kneeling with one knee. Is that you?
Can't say for that.
Right. You can't say
I
that.
would think it is,
You think it is.
but then I can't. Who's that PC McDonough there? For that photo, okay, this one,
Yes.
DC Connell's, the blue jacket, far right, okay?
Yeah.
That's PS Maxwell with a hat on,
Yes.
first on the screen. I recognise DS Davidson and I can see Craig Walker.
Right. And those are the ones that you recognised?
Yeah, for that photo. I mean,
Yeah.
the other photos, they definitely can identify
Thank
everyone.
you. That's helpful. Can I ask you about your Perk Statement again, please?
Sure.
So this time I'm interested in page 5, paragraphs 8, 10 and 11. So they're towards the latter half of that page. And you talk about the recovery of a knife at the scene. So it starts with DS Davidson came across, and all I remember is hearing her voice. She was asking someone, is there a knife being recovered, or has there been a knife? If was something like that. A male voice, I don't know who that was, answered her back saying, it's lying on the grass. And DC Connell was there. And then you say DC Connell went across the other side of the road. I could see him and where he went, as I was still lying across the male's legs, facing towards the grass area. That's when I looked down Hayfield Road and saw PC Nicole Short beside a police van, marked Make Unknown. She was staggering on the road holding her stomach. She had her hand across her stomach. I didn't see anyone with her at that time. I looked back and saw DC Connell on the grass. He was looking about. He had a bag, a paper brown bag, a production bag. I'm not sure if he had this with him when he first went over. My attention was distracted looking down the road and seeing PC Short. I didn't see DC Connell pick anything up. My attention was all back and forward as I was still concentrating on holding the male's legs. So this is at the point that you're still lying over Mr. Bio's legs,
Yeah.
so earlier from where we've got to. And there's mention of recovering a knife. Can you tell us a little bit more about what was happening at this point with DC Connell?
Well, for what I seen with DC Connell was he was over at the grass area where I'm looking across on Hayfield Road because I'm obviously on Mr. Bio's legs. So I seen him looking about in the grass area.
And when we looked at the photos earlier and
Yeah.
we saw you identified DC Connell with the blue jacket,
Yeah.
so he wasn't in a high-vis vest. Was that the general area where you saw him going?
Yes.
Thank you. And I understand you took steps taping across Henry Road.
I can't remember that.
All right. And then you were still there when the ambulance arrived, is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah. And can I ask you to look at the evidence video timeline again, please? And I think we're interested in 7:27:31. And this may be some Snapchat footage. And if we need to just play it from there, that's fine. And we can pause it. So this is later than the earlier events. If we can just play that.
Look, I'm heading from Edinburgh. This guy's doing the speed.
Just pause it, please. And do you see the Snapchat footage? That is similar to where the still has been taken that we
Yes,
looked at a
yeah,
moment
yeah.
ago. Yeah. So you had identified yourself from that previously. And then can we look, please, at 7:31:34? And you'll see this is referred to on page 12 of the spreadsheet. So page 12 of the spreadsheet. And 7:31:34, which is near the top. And you'll see 3 persons can be seen moving towards the grassy area from the exit of the roundabout. You got that bit on page 12? In Hayfield Road, 1 person breaks away from the other 2 to move further up towards North Henry Road and pauses at the grassy area. And can I ask you to look at that? And we'll play this until 7:32:23 or thereabouts.
ETA for the ambulance, 3 minutes.
Control for 411.
Go ahead.
Just for the proper, chest compressions commence, however, breaths have stopped due to cross-contamination, blood, etc.
Roger.
That's fine, thank you very much. Did you see the movement on the CCTV with officers what appear to be moving tape?
Yeah.
Do you know who they were?
No.
No, you don't. That wasn't you being involved in that process, were you? You
No
don't
idea.
remember. Don't remember. Can we look at Perk 258, page 7, please? Paragraph 3. So this is your Perk statement, page 7, which was given in early June, 4th of June 2015. And you say, I recall at one point I went away to put tape across the road at Henry Road. This was before the ambulance arrived. I recall I had went back over to where the mail was before the ambulance arrived. I remember standing beside PS Maxwell when the ambulance arrived. My recollection is that it was the same 3 officers that were dealing with the mail, Walker, Smith and Payton. There could have been other officers there, but I just remember seeing those 3. So it does appear you were involved at some point in taping.
Yeah, I just can't remember it, is all.
No.
But if that's what I said to Perk, then
That's absolutely fine. Now, can I ask you, before you left the scene at Hayfield Road, did you do you recall any senior officers speaking to you about don't confer, don't discuss the incident with anyone else? Did anyone mention that to you?
No.
No. And I think you say in your Perk statement, I don't need to take you to this, that you were told to head back to the station at some point by Sergeant Maxwell.
Yeah.
Is that right? And then you drove one of the cars back to Kirkcaldy Police Office. Do you remember which one?
Nope.
No. Do you remember if you drove any other officers back to Kirkcaldy Police
I
Office?
can't remember.
No. How were you feeling when you got back to Kirkcaldy Police Office?
Not in this world is the best way I could probably describe it.
Right. Could you look at paragraph 55 of your inquiry statement, please? And you say, as we get this on the screen, I'll just start reading it out. I was still in shock. I didn't know the outcome of what happened as Mr. Byle was taken away in an ambulance. I didn't know what would happen when we got back to the police station in terms of procedure. Does that sum up what you were thinking?
Definitely.
So did you feel at that time that you were uncertain about the right procedures and the way things were going to be carried out?
What do you mean by that?
When you say there, I didn't know what would happen when we got back to the police station in terms of procedure.
Yeah, so what I mean by in terms of procedure is what's going to happen when we go back to the station. Again, I'd never been involved in anything like that, and certainly at that time, so I didn't know what was going to happen, what outcome was going to be. I didn't know what was going to happen with Mr. Byle. He was away in an ambulance, so yeah.
All right, thank you. And then paragraph 56, you say, on return, I think I went into the writing room. PC Walker was there, and I think he said that someone needs to call the Federation. I think PC Payton was also there at that time. I didn't say anything to them. Is the writing room near the canteen?
No.
No. What's in the writing room?
So the writing room is basically where officers would get access to their computer, and that's where all the admin would be done. Where your kind of toolkit, where you could keep your paperwork, they were in the writing room, that kind of thing.
So we've heard some mention of forms being available on computers.
Yeah, sure.
Is the writing room where the computers are available?
Yeah.
Right. And the Federation is the Scottish Police Federation.
Yeah, that's right.
And do you remember any conversation that Walker and Payton were having in the writing room?
No, I just distinctly recall PC Walker saying that somebody needs to call the Federation.
Right. And then I think Sergeant Maxwell told you to go to Victoria Hospital to collect PC Smith. Is that right?
I can't remember that. But
All right. Do you want to look at paragraph 57 of your inquiry statement, and you say, I was only in the station for about 5 minutes before Police Sergeant Scott Maxwell told me to go to Victoria Hospital to collect PC Smith. And once I got back with PC Smith, I went to the canteen. Do you remember that now, seeing that there?
I remember obviously going to the canteen, but I'd been still in shock. So that's not to say I didn't go to the hospital, but I just can't remember that part.
Okay, that's fine. So this is from your inquiry statement that you gave us. Do you remember at all any conversation with PC Smith or anything that happened at the hospital?
No.
No. Okay. Can I ask you to look at your Perk Statement, page 8, please, paragraph 3. And you say, I went upstairs to the writing room. Do you see that?
Yeah.
I went in there and PC Craig Walker and PC Alan Payton were in there. I remember PC Walker saying that the Federation were coming. There was no discussion between us about what had happened. I was only in the office for about 5 minutes, and PS Maxwell came in and told me to go to the hospital to pick up PC Alan Smith. I left the office by myself to pick up PC Smith. I had a marked Corsa. I got to the Victoria Hospital. I went into the hospital. I tried to point him on the radio, but he did not answer. We've heard that that's a direct call, effectively, to another officer.
That's right.
Is that right? He did not answer. When I was in the hospital, I saw PC Nicole Short. She was in there getting treatment. I did not have any discussion about what had happened to her. I just asked her if she was all right. She was with PC Mark Hay, Glenrothes. I did not have any discussion with him. I found PC Smith and the two of us came back to the police office. I was speaking to PC Smith on the way back, but what about I don't recall. I don't remember anything specifically being mentioned about the incident. PC Smith never said anything about the male's condition. I was still quite shocked by this whole incident, so my recollection of any conversation is unsure. And this is your Perk Statement. So just over a month after the events, you said you were still quite shocked at the point you went to collect PC Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And if your recollection wasn't good then, I don't imagine it's any better now.
No.
No, okay. When you went back to the canteen, perhaps we could look at paragraph 56 of your inquiry statement. You talk about going back to the canteen. Sorry, I've gone back over that. I'm interested in, sorry, I'd like to go to paragraph 69. The equipment that you had on the day and where you stored your vest and items like that. So you've told us you went back to the canteen. Where were you storing equipment and your stab-proof vest? So paragraph 69 talks about being in the canteen, and I'm just wondering if that's where you stored your equipment.
On that day, then,
Yeah,
then yes, in
on
the
the day.
canteen. Yeah, yeah.
And we've heard other officers talking about leaning their vests against walls or things being on the floor and some things being on a table.
No, I think I would have had my stuff probably down on the floor beside me where I was sitting.
And where were you sitting in the canteen?
There was like a kind of big table. I couldn't say where I was sitting, but I was
And were
sitting
other
at the table.
other people at the table as
I
well?
think there was people, I can't recall who, but there would have been people, and I think some people were, there was two kind of sofas, and I think
Okay.
somebody was sat there.
Thank you. Do you remember receiving any instructions from any senior officers that day in the canteen, not to speak to other officers or in relation to your status as a witness or a suspect?
Not so sure about the speaking to other folk, but definitely not about status.
Definitely not about that.
Nope.
No. And we've heard some senior officers mentioned. Can I just give you their names and see if you remember any of them speaking to you? So, Conrad Trickett.
I was in still a lot of shock. I'm aware that Conrad Trickett is now there, but if Conrad Trickett walked in front of me, I wouldn't know what he looked like.
Right. And you mean he was there on the 3rd of May?
Yeah.
Stephen Kay?
I know Stephen K. I can't recall seeing Stephen K. I don't think.
Okay. Pat Campbell?
No idea who Pat Campbell is.
All right. And you've said in your inquiry statement you don't remember Nicole Short coming back from the hospital.
Not that I can recall.
No. And then can I ask, did anyone give you advice or instructions about completing any paperwork? And when I say paperwork, I'm thinking, first of all, use of spray forms. I mean, you've told us you didn't use a spray, so that wouldn't have been relevant to you. Use of force forms, would that have been relevant to you in 2015? You told us.
Yeah, it could have.
Could have, yeah. Did anyone give you advice or instructions about completing a use of force form?
No, but then for me personally, it wouldn't have been for me because I done the fast straps, which I didn't think were part of use of force at that point. They are now.
Right.
However, I don't see what can happen now is one officer can submit a use of force for all the kind of elements.
Right. So we've heard that at some point there could have been one form completed for an incident.
Yes.
In 2015, is it your recollection that it was one form, or was it every officer having used force?
I don't know.
would
I just
complete a
think
form?
it would have been one form, but that could be wrong.
Okay. What about your notebooks? Did anyone give you advice or instruction about completing or not completing your notebook?
Not that I can recall. No.
Now, you've said in your statement there was a system in place for checking officers' notebooks by senior officers. Could you tell us a little bit more about that system?
Yeah, sure. So basically, what would happen is every so often, I think it was normally an inspector, normally your shift inspector would come round. They would check your notebook at the beginning of a shift, whether it be a day shift, back shift. They would take everyone's notebook, check through it. That included all the officers, make sure they were filling it in correctly, and then they would give you it back, or they would say, "That's not good enough. You need to do this like this," etc. So that's all that was.
So there was some sort of supervision at that time?
Of notebooks, yeah.
Yeah. You've mentioned the shift inspector. Who would that have been on the 3rd of May?
I don't know.
Don't know.
I don't know.
Any idea at all who that would have been?
Maybe Stephen K. I'm not sure.
Okay. Did anybody inspect your notebook that day at the end of your shift?
Not that I can recall.
No. You've said in paragraph 80 of your inquiry statement that you weren't capable of making notes given the state you were in.
Sure.
Do you want to tell us about the state you were in?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I felt like I was in a different world. I was shocked I wouldn't know what to write in my notebook. Even if I wasn't, I don't know if anyone would have known what to write in their notebook about an incident like that.
Right.
I think even now, if this happened, no one would know what to write in their notebook.
All right. I think in your Perk statement you use the words zoned out.
That's accurate.
Is that accurate? And what do you mean by that, zoned out?
Not listening to, taking in information. Not that I'm not wanting to. It's not like ignorant, like being ignorant and ignoring someone, but just not retaining information.
All right, thank you. And at paragraph 80 you say, I did not fill in my notebook or prepare an operational statement, as Amanda Given told us not to give a statement at that time as the incident had just happened. Thereafter, I received advice from my solicitor not to provide an account until my status was confirmed. And that was the advice you were given by your lawyer. And when did you get that advice from your lawyer?
Oh, I don't know. It wasn't long after.
But it was after the 3rd of May.
Yeah.
And you've said there that Amanda Given told us not to give a statement at that time as the incident had just happened. Did she explain why she was giving you that advice?
Yeah, because the incident just happened and we need to find out what's happening.
Right. And when you say what's happening,
I don't know. It was, she said that, and what I understood to that is, right, okay, the incident's just happened, we've not received all the information, so we're not giving a statement.
And we've heard from other officers that they weren't clear on the 3rd of May what their status was. They didn't know if they were...
Yeah, that's right. I was never clear.
You weren't clear either. So you didn't know whether you were a witness or a suspect?
No.
And we've heard from other officers that they maybe would have liked something in writing or something to be explained more clearly. Would you have liked that sort of approach?
Spoken to someone confirmed in writing, contact my lawyer or the Federation, yeah, everything.
Yeah. So you would have liked a bit of clarity
Yep.
about that. And then, can I ask you to look at your Perk Statement 258, page 8, please, and paragraph 7. And you say here, there was a Federation officer, a female, you see that on the screen,
Yeah.
who spoke to us as a group. I remember her saying that the Perk would be dealing with it. I cannot recall all that she said. I remember her telling us to just say nothing just now, as it had all just happened. Is that a reference to Amanda Given of the SPF?
Yeah, well, she was the only Federation officer that was there, so yeah, I'd say so. I know I've not mentioned her there, but yeah.
All right, thank you. And then can I ask you about the MIT or the MIT? Can we look at page 9 of your Perk Statement, paragraph 10? And that starts within the week. I'm not sure of exactly when I was spoken to by the 2 officers from the MIT team and asked to provide an operational statement. I don't know who the officers were. I made them aware that I wouldn't be after being told that the Perk were investigating the incident, and I found it weird that the MIT team would ask for a statement. I had also been given legal advice after a meeting with Peter Watson, lawyer. He told us not to provide a statement as the status was to be confirmed. Now you say there you found it weird that the MIT team would ask for a statement. What was weird about that?
I believed PERT to be an independent body, so I don't understand why people employed by Police Scotland for the major investigations team would get a statement on their behalf.
Did you feel you had a clear explanation of why MIT were wanting to speak to you about this?
I don't know, I understand some of the things that have been said, but I wasn't aware of statuses and if they were acting on behalf of PERK. I don't know if anyone ever... We're told PERK were investigating it. So the MIT team coming and then saying they're getting statements, that sounded weird to me.
Is it fair to say you were a bit confused about what was going on at that time?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And how were you feeling? You said that it was within the week, but how were you feeling at that point when you were speaking to them?
Just probably the same as what I did right after the incident.
Yeah. You've used the word shock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Still feeling zoned out?
Oh, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Then can I ask you to look at page 8, paragraph 7 of your Perk Statement? And no, I think I've actually just referred to that. I don't need to go back to that. I'd like to move on now and ask you some questions about race.
Sure.
Can you tell us, had you had training on equality and diversity in Police Scotland by May 2015?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So that was at the police college.
At Tullyallen?
Yes. So that would be during your probation. I think it's all different now, the amount of weeks you spend at police college, but I think when I was there it was 10 weeks. You were then put to station for so long, and then you came back and done another 2 or 3 weeks, I think. So certainly for the first initial 10 weeks, you'd done it on the first week, and I think it was, they kept kind of going back to a couple of lessons into the course, I'm sure.
So something they came back to as your course was continued?
Yeah, so like the first week was all equality diversity, and then there was other kind of aspects of policing, but I'm sure they still touched on equality diversity whilst they were doing some of
Right.
that.
And that was throughout your period at Tullyallen?
2 out of 10 weeks, yeah.
Yeah.
First week.
And in terms of the equality and diversity training, what sort of topics did the course cover? Do you remember?
They would have covered quite a lot of things. I'm sure there was just discrimination, stuff like that, stuff about age, gender, sexual orientation, these kind of things, race, religion, yeah.
Okay. And were you taught on that course about unconscious bias?
No.
No. So were you ever asked to identify in yourself any type of unconscious bias?
Not that I recall.
And in terms of what you did learn on that course, you've talked about the different elements of it. How were you able to put that into practice in your day-to-day work?
Well, that was easy for me because I just treat everyone the same anyway, so.
All right, okay. And have you ever made assumptions about anyone based on the colour of their skin?
No.
Do you remember how many officers were at Kirkcaldy Police Office in 2015?
No.
No. Can you give us an indication at all of the sort of size of Kirkcaldy Police Office?
Including all officers
Yeah.
and custody officers, I don't know, just say 80, 90.
All right. Were any of them black or from other ethnic minority groups?
I don't think so.
Don't think so. Before May 2015, did you ever encounter anyone making racist comments or jokes at work
No.
in Kirkcaldy? Did you ever encounter any comments or jokes about Islam or terrorists?
No.
Had you ever seen any of your colleagues on your team, your response team, exhibiting behaviour of that type?
No.
Had you ever heard any of them using words like coloured in referring to someone who was black?
Not my colleagues, no.
No. When you say not your colleagues, do you mean other people?
Members of the community have said that.
Oh, right. So people that you were coming into contact with
Yep.
in Kirkcaldy, in
Yep.
the area?
Yep.
If you had heard any comments of that nature in your work, how would you react to that?
I think it's about education and addressing it. For example, I know you're asking a question about police officers, but if I just could quickly take it back to members
Please
of the
do.
public.
Yeah.
So I've seen, I've dealt with incidents where people have made mention, a black man or someone who's Muslim or anything like that, calling them coloured.
Right.
So I've had to address that before.
And what have you done in your day-to-day work? What did you do when you say you addressed it? What
We
did you
educate
do?
them in the fact that colour's not a correct term now.
Right. And were you doing that before May 2015?
Yes. So the way I see that, right, is coloured for me was used years ago. And I think it's about education. I think a lot of people got confused and seemed to think that by referring to someone colour or of colour was a politer way of addressing that instead of calling someone black. It's definitely not acceptable now, and I think it's almost an educational thing that people aren't aware of it.
Right.
There is a lot of people I'm aware a black man's a black man, a black woman's a black woman. They're not coloured.
Right.
But it's I kind of label it as almost a generational thing.
Huh? What do you mean by that?
When I say that is that not everyone, you have to understand, but you can, especially in Kirkcaldy, that's where I've worked, okay? There's a lot of people in Kirkcaldy that still refer to people of colour, okay? For me, it seems quite Kirkcaldy based. You get a lot of elderly people that have maybe just, for a different time, for a different era, who are just maybe not as educated in it, that they make these kind of comments.
So the older people may use words like that.
Of course, but remember, younger people can also, I've heard younger people say it as well, but I'm just kind of...
Yeah. That's your experience?
Yes.
And then, can I ask you, at the time of Mr. Bio's death in May 2015, were you aware of any public concerns about the use of force by police officers, particularly against black men? Did you have any general awareness of those concerns?
At 2015, before
in
it? Sorry.
2015?
No.
No. And in your own experience, were you aware if that was of any concern to Police Scotland on a wider basis? Concerns about use of force by police officers against?
Not that I'm aware.
No. You may be aware now that there's been a number of high-profile deaths in police custody, not just in Scotland. I'm talking about the wider UK. And some of those specifically relate to concerns about the use of restraint by police officers. So at the time in May 2015, were you aware of any other cases in, down south, in the UK more widely, where a person had died in police custody and restraint had been an issue?
No.
No. Were you aware if learning from other areas of the UK was being shared with Police Scotland?
Not that I was aware of. No.
Was that something you'd come across in Tullyallen when you were on your course? Maybe the sharing of information from England or experiences down south or Northern Ireland?
I think at some point I've been aware of sharing information with other agencies, but not necessarily about that.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you some questions about your understanding and awareness of the black community in Kirkcaldy?
Sure.
Had you been involved in any community relation work?
No.
No. Were you aware of any such work being undertaken by colleagues, say on the response team?
No.
Did you have much experience of the black community, and I mean not just as suspects of crime, but as witnesses or victims of crime?
I probably would have dealt with victims, witnesses, that kind of thing. I don't think I've ever dealt with a black suspect before.
Right. And had you been dealing with members of the black community who were maybe witnesses or victims of crime?
Yeah, I would have at some stage.
Yeah. And then had you had at that stage much contact with members of the black community, even on a social basis?
No, just other than my work.
Right.
Or I used to play rugby, and there was a black man that they played with. So.
Right. How often did you play rugby?
So I played during my teenage years, and then later, and then it's kind of just in my late 20s. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And was that a regular game that you would play?
Yeah, so we played for a team in that. So you train like Tuesday and Thursdays and played on a Saturday.
All right. So it was 3 times a week.
Yeah.
How many years did you play rugby?
Could say it was a while. I played for a while.
Okay. Can I ask you to look at a photo? And we may at some point hear that this is a photo of a wedding that you attended.
Sure. Yep.
In 2013, and we're going to put that up on the screen. And just to give you a little bit of the background, this was a wedding, a photo from a wedding of a woman called Jodie Lynch. She was the bride. You're nodding. And I think your partner at the time was a friend of the bride.
That's
and
right.
they worked together
Yes.
at that stage. And she also happened to be a friend of Colette Bell, who was Mr. Bio's partner at the time.
Okay.
Right. You maybe weren't aware of that connection.
No. How that was put to me, that could be wrong, but Colette Bell was the cousin of Jodie Lynch.
All right, so she might have been even more than a friend. She might have been
I
related.
could be wrong, but that's what I was
All right.
told. So.
No, that's fine. And do we see in this photo that actually, is that you there that we see dressed up for
Yes.
the wedding? And then we also see Mr. Bio.
That is Mr. Pine.
Yeah, so had you had any contact with him at that wedding? That was the wedding that took place in 2013, on the 4th of May 2013.
I think I had any contact with him. I think my partner recalls that we were sat at the same table though, but I wasn't sure about that.
Right,
I don't
okay.
know.
Well, that's fine. Thank you very much. We can put that photo away. And can I ask you about black stereotypes?
Sure.
Are you aware of any stereotypes in relation to black people generally and black men in particular in relation to criminal justice?
Have I heard from other people and things like
Yeah.
that? Not my views.
No. Just
For
are you
criminal
aware
justice,
of stereotypes?
okay, yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us what some of the stereotypes are that you've heard of?
I probably couldn't list all them, but so black men are more likely to be part of a gang.
Right.
Probably one I could think of that I've heard.
And where have you heard these sort of stereotypes?
Media, social media,
Okay.
probably television documentaries, things like that.
Mm-hmm. So you're aware of that. Is that something that you received training on in relation to the training you've had at Tullyallen? Did they address things like stereotypes and how to avoid falling into any stereotypical traps or making assumptions?
They probably did about assumptions and stuff like that. I'd imagine they did cover that. I can't completely recall it, but that's something I thought they probably would have addressed, to be fair.
And were you aware of any attitudes in Kirkcaldy at that time that black men might have been perceived as more likely to resist, to be less compliant, more violent, or to have superhuman strength or size?
No, and like I said earlier, apart from this incident, I have never dealt with a black suspect, female or male.
Okay. So you didn't have any assumptions like that yourself?
No.
And could you just give me a moment,
Sure.
please? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have no
Thank
further
you.
questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Apart from Ms McCall, are there any other Rule 9 applications? Ms Mitchell, Mr Scullion and Constable Gibson, I wonder if you would withdraw to the witness room so that I can hear submissions.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Ms Mitchell, if you come up first then, please, and make your submission. Yes.
Yes, the first issue that I would like to put to the witness arises from his Perk Statement 258, page 7 of 11. And he speaks about that Nicola Shepherd came into the canteen and she said that the family have a right to know what happened. And I would like to explore that a little more to find out when it was that she came in, who Nicola Shepherd said this to, what was she saying in response to? I think the witness goes on a little to explain that he believes it might have been because the Federation officer had told them to say nothing. So I would just like to explore that.
Is this explored in evidence as well as in the Perk Statement?
It's not explored, it hasn't been explored in evidence with my learned friend. So that was the first issue. The second issue...
Sorry, I didn't catch that. It says,
sorry,
yes,
so
the page number is there. That's
page
fine.
7 of 11,
Yeah.
the final 3 paragraphs. Chief Inspector Nicola Shepherd at Kirkcaldy, the Kirkcaldy CI came in at one point and she said that the family have a right to know what happened. And I just want to explore a little more of that context with the questions that I've put forward. The next issue is in relation to issues of race. and he has spoken about, I suppose, the lack of racism. And what I would like to ask him is whether or not he was aware of any allegations of racism out with the police, i.e. by members of the public against police officers, and whether or not he was aware if any of those allegations had been upheld. So rather than simply looking at it as to whether or not there was racism within the police force, were there allegations made by members of the public?
Is there an evidential base for that?
There is an evidential base for that that's been disclosed. This witness may not know of that, but I want to ask in general whether or not he's aware of any allegations of racism.
Yes.
So I wouldn't be able to put to him a precise allegation about somebody else, but he may know of that. In relation to the next issue, the witness said that he was given training on discrimination, and he said that he was given training in gender, he was given training in sexual orientation, and the inquiry will come to hear when another witness gives evidence. In her statement, she had been asked if there was sexism or homophobia, and she responds that she saw someone being treated differently because they were being treated differently if they were a female or they were gay or lesbian, and she said she did witness that. So what I would like to pose to this witness is whether or not they were trained not to make comments or jokes or treat people differently in relation to their gender, or not to make comments or jokes or treat people differently in relation to sexual orientation. And also, of course, to not make comments or jokes or treat people differently because of their race, because we have at least an instance of one officer saying that at least two of those other things occurred. And the final issue that I would like to raise is the issue of the last questions that were asked in respect of the picture being taken. And he said his partner recalled that they had sat at the same table, just to explore when it was that they realised that they'd been to a wedding together, and why he didn't mention that he had met Mr. Bayo when he was interviewed by the Perk.
Are these all the issues?
Yes.
Can you return to your seat then, please, and Mr. Scullion, if you come.
The witness was asked if in the period following 3rd May of 2015 there was some confusion surrounding his status, and he told the inquiry that as part of the confused picture, he said that he believed that the Perk were an independent body, so he didn't understand why people employed by Police Scotland, namely the MIT, would get a statement on their behalf, but it wasn't explored where he got the information that MIT were taking statements on behalf of Perk. And I would like to explore with him whether in fact he got that information at a meeting on 7th May of 2015, where he met with Detective Inspector Stuart Wilson and Detective Chief Inspector Keith Hardy, at which time he was told that they were there on behalf of Perk in order to get a statement, and whether he was asked to provide a statement at that time and informed that his status was that of witness.
Thank you. Mr. Moore?
Sir, the questions I would like to ask relate to the officer when he was in the canteen, and similar to yesterday, in the aftermath of the incident, were you or any of your colleagues concerned about whether allegations of racism may come up due to Mr Bio's race? During the time spent in the canteen at Kirkcaldy Police Office, did you or any of your colleagues raise the issue of Mr Bio's race or potential allegations of racism? If so, in what context? During the time spent in the canteen at Kirkcaldy Office, did anyone raise concerns about potential allegations of racism? And if so, what was said and by whom? And that's what I would like to ask, sir.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'll adjourn to consider these submissions. Ms Mitchell, I shall allow you to ask questions in relation to Nicola Shepherd. I do not consider that it would assist the inquiry to explore further with this witness any of the other issues you've raised. I shall allow Mr Scullion to explore his issue. I do not consider that it would be of assistance to the inquiry for Mr Moyer to explore his issues with this witness. So could we have the witness back now, please? Constable Gibson, you're going to be asked some questions first by Miss Mitchell, QC, who acts for the Bio families.
Thanks, sir.
I wonder if we could look at your Perk Statement, that's number 258, and we're looking at page 7 of 11, the final 3 paragraphs. And I'll just explain while we're waiting for that, that I want to ask you, yeah, sorry, certainly, yes, Perk 258, page 7 of 11. Is that?
Actually, page
8,
Oh,
sorry,
did it myself.
thank you. Now, do we see at the bottom of that page, and that page talks about when you're back in the canteen, it says, I remember that CI, is that Chief Inspector? I remember that Chief Inspector Nicola Shepherd, the Kirkcaldy CI, came in at one point, she said, at one point she said that the family have the right to know what happened. She only came in for about 5 minutes. I don't know why she said that. I'm assuming that was because the Federation officer, female, had told us to say nothing at that stage. And then if we could go on to the next page, please. Much later on, I was told that my clothing and equipment was going to be taken. Do you remember Chief Inspector Shepherd coming in to speak to you?
Yes.
Okay. And when she came to speak to you, did she speak to you all as a group?
She made a statement in front of the group.
Okay. And did that statement involve her speaking about the family having a right to know what happened?
Yes.
Okay. And what context was that said in?
I seem to recall it's you better cooperate because someone's lost a family member.
Okay. So she was asking you to cooperate, and by cooperate, what did she mean?
I have no idea.
Were you being asked, for example, to give statements?
I don't know.
Well, were you being asked to give statements by that point? Had anyone asked you about giving a statement?
I'm not sure if anyone has asked about a statement. I know that we were given advice by the Federation that the incident had just happened and not to provide any kind of statement just now.
So is your position that you thought that Nicola Shepherd was saying that you should in fact cooperate with giving a statement because that the family had a right to know what happened?
I would assume that's what she meant by saying that.
Can I ask you, can you remember what time she said that? I'm not asking for
Sure.
an actual pinpointed
Sure.
time, but we see in your statement there, you say, much later on, I was told that my clothing equipment was going to be taken. Can you approximate when it was that Chief Inspector Shepherd came in and spoke to you about that?
Not exactly, but probably not long after we had found out that Mr. Bayou was now deceased.
Mitchell. If you'd like to return to your seat. Mr. Scullion. Mr. Gibson, we're going to be asked questions by Mr. Scullion, who is the Senior Counsel for Perk.
Thanks, sir.
PC Gibson, you were asked by Senior Counsel to the inquiry about confusion surrounding your status in the period following the events of 3rd May 2015.
Sure.
And by status, you'll understand that is whether you were a suspect or a witness at that time.
Yes, sir.
And you explained that you believed Perk to be an independent body, and you said that you didn't understand why people employed by Police Scotland from the major investigation team would be getting a statement on their behalf. Do you remember giving
Yes,
that evidence?
I do.
And where did the information come from that officers from the major investigation team would be getting statements on behalf of Perk?
I think that's came for the inquiry that I've seen, that they were getting it on behalf of Perk.
Well, did you attend a meeting on 7th of May 2015 involving a Detective Inspector Stuart Wilson and a Detective Chief Inspector Keith Hardy?
I don't know who the other officer was, but I seem to recognise the name Hardy that I spoke to,
Well,
or went to.
is it possible that there was that you were at a meeting where you were asked to provide a statement on behalf of Perk?
That could have been a possibility. Yeah.
And do you remember now whether it was in the context of that meeting that those officers told you that they were there on behalf of Perk?
They might have. I can't recall that. I couldn't say.
All right. And do you remember around that time being asked to provide a statement and told at that time that your status was that of witness?
I can't recall.
Is that a possibility?
It could be a possibility.
All right. Thank you.
Ms. McCall, do you have any matters? Yes. Can you give me an indication of the areas you're going to cover?
Yes. The first area is to clarify who applied the fast straps, because Constable Gibson in his oral testimony indicated he couldn't quite remember. So it's to refer him to his Perk statement and see whether he thought that was accurate. And the second issue is in relation to questions on race. Constable Gibson was asked how he put his training into practice. And it was to take an illustration of that from him, from his experience, with reference to a document that's before the inquiry.
Are these the matters?
These are.
Well, I shall allow these matters. So you're going to be asked some questions by your own counsel, Mr.
Thanks, sir.
Constable Gibson, you were asked if you remembered who applied the fast straps to Mr. Bio, and what you said was you weren't sure, but you thought it might have been Constable Smith and Constable McDonough.
Yes.
I wonder if I could just ask you to look again at your Perk statement, which is 00258, and it's page 5 of that, paragraph 2. I'll just read a bit of that to you. I'm not 100% sure, but I think at some stage PC Alan Smith, he's an OST trainer, was at the legs and he mentioned fast straps. I remember PC McDonough saying he had fast straps. PC McDonough started off trying to apply the fast straps to the male's legs. By this point I was aware that PC Kaylee Good was there and she was assisting to pull the straps through. By this time the male was on his front. When the straps were through, PC Alan Smith crossed the straps over and tightened them. I still stayed on his legs. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And if that's what you've said to the Perk on the 4th of June 2015, do you think that's likely to be accurate?
Yes. I've more or less described that all. However, by looking at this, I see I've left out PC Kaylee Good.
Well, that was what I was trying to get from you, that PC Good was involved in pulling the strap through.
Yeah, I mean, PC Good's involvement wasn't as great as some of the other officers due to their inexperience. But, yeah, I mean, if that's what I've said to Perk there, then that'll have been what happened.
That'll be right. All right, thank you. And then I want to ask you about the question of race. You were asked about the training you'd received, and you were asked how you put that into practice.
Sure.
And you told the chair you just treat everyone the same.
Yes.
And I wondered if I could ask you about a particular example of when you might have put your training into practice. Do you recollect an incident you were involved in which involved a witness who was a Pakistani female, and you required to use an interpreter in your involvement with her? Does that ring a bell with you?
I've had to do that a couple of times.
All right. I wonder if I could ask you to look at something then, please. Hopefully we can put it on the screen. Sorry? Perhaps just set that up while the hard copy comes. What you're going to be shown, Constable Gibson, is a copy of a performance development review that's yours for the period that ends November 2013, so about 18 months before the incident with Mr. Bio.
Okay.
And we'll just wait for that document to come so that you can see it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, thank you.
I'll just give the number for this for the transcript. It's PS 01116. And if you look, Constable Gibson, at the first page, do you see that this is headed up National PDR, which I think stands for Performance Development Review, is that right?
Yes.
And we see under that, it's got your name on it, and the review period has a finish date of the 24th of November 2013. Do you see that?
Yes.
Were you still in your probation at that time?
Yes.
All right. If you turn, please, to page 3.
Yep.
And one of the competencies that they're reviewing is respect for diversity. So you should see that heading at the top of the page. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And do we see that you're assessed as competent in this period?
Yes.
I'll just read this out to you. PC Gibson was tasked with attending the home of a Pakistani female to inform her of, and then the issue is redacted, it was known in advance that the female did not speak any English and an interpreter was used to assist. The female had been a hostile witness. PC Gibson briefed the interpreter as to the requirements and asked how best he should approach the female, what wordings would be best used, and if there were any cultural issues that he should be aware of or any issues he should avoid talking about. He completed the task accordingly and in addition set up a means of communication that the female could use to contact police in an emergency if she had the need to use the 999 system for any further problem, given her lack of English. Now that I've read that to you, do you recollect that incident?
It'd be quite hard to recollect because it was so long ago. But there has been similar things like that before, more recently.
All right. There are a couple of things that are noted there is that you asked the interpreter how you should approach the female, what wording would be best used if there are any cultural issues you should be aware of or anything you should avoid talking about. Why did you do that?
So the interpreter spoke the language of the female, so in this case, she spoke Pakistani. She might understand things a little bit better. I'm aware for training that not necessarily the Pakistani people, but I remember with some kind of religions that some females might not want to speak to a male police officer, they might want to speak to a female, these kind of things. So I think she would maybe have a kind of better understanding. So I used that to my advantage and asked her if she could assist. And yeah, basically, so I could make the female be at ease and just have a bit of respect for her, I guess.
So was that an example of things that you'd learned to do through your training?
Some of, yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Constable Gibson, thank you very much for coming to give evidence to the inquiry. The inquiry will be adjourning for the day in a moment, and then you'll be free to go.
Thanks, sir.
I'm going to adjourn now until next Tuesday, so it's a long weekend, and I hope you all have a calm, long weekend.